My name is Jake Whitman, and before you ask why anyone would willingly move to Siloam Springs, Arkansas, let me explain that sometimes life doesn't give you choices. It gives you court orders. The DUI happened in Fayetteville. Third strike in 2 years, which meant my commercial driving license vanished along with my trucking career. Judge Hendricks offered me a deal. Complete community service in a town where I couldn't easily find trouble or spend 18 months in county. Siloam Springs might as well have been Mars compared to Little Rock, but it beat orange jumpsuits. My cousin Dale ran a bail bonds office on Main Street and knew about the RadioShack position. "Easy money," he said over beer at the doghouse. "Old Mr. Patterson, who owned it, died last month. New corporate management needs someone to close out inventory before they shutter the place permanently." The building sat between Arvest Bank and a vacant storefront that used to house Kim's Oriental Market. 40 years of dust coated the windows, and half the letters had fallen off the sign, leaving RadioShack CK in faded red plastic. The whole strip mall had that tired look of businesses hanging on by habit rather than profit. Patterson's nephew, Tommy, met me with the keys on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and regret. He was maybe 25, wearing a Razorbacks cap and jeans that had seen better decades. "Uncle Bill left some notes about running the place," Tommy said, handing me a manila envelope thick with papers. Weird stuff, but he was particular about procedures. Just follow what he wrote, yeah? Corporate says they want everything done exactly like Bill did it, even the closing routine. The store felt frozen in time, shelves lined with battery testers, CB radio accessories, and packages of resistors that probably hadn't sold since Clinton was governor. A pegboard behind the counter displayed cell phone cases for models that seemed ancient, and the cash register looked like something from a museum. Tommy showed me the basic operations: opening, counting the till, logging inventory, standard retail stuff. But when he got to the evening procedures, his voice got quieter. Bill was real specific about the closing checklist. Don't skip steps. Don't change the order. Corporate's been checking security footage remotely, making sure protocols get followed. He left me with the envelope and a handshake that felt like a goodbye. I didn't open Bill Patterson's notes until my third day on the job. 7 typed pages on RadioShack letterhead with amendments written in blue ink. Some of it looked standard: lock doors, count registers, check displays. But other entries made me wonder if old Bill had been hitting the cooking wine. The first strange thing I noticed wasn't in the notes, though. It was the radio scanner behind the counter, permanently tuned to a frequency that picked up nothing but static. At least, that's what I thought until 9:47 p.m. on my first Thursday. That's when the voices started asking for help with electronics from 1987. Bill Patterson's handwriting reminded me of my grandfather's, careful cursive from an era when penmanship mattered. The first page looked normal enough: standard opening procedures, inventory tracking, basic customer service protocols. But page 3 made my coffee grow cold in the cup. Evening procedures. Mandatory compliance. Rule 1. At 9:45 p.m., turn the scanner radio to frequency 462.7125 MHz. Do not attempt to change the channel after this time. Monitor until 10:15 p.m. Rule 2. When voices begin transmission at 9:47 p.m., acknowledge with RadioShack technical support. How can I help you? Do not deviate from this exact phrasing. Rule 3. Listen to each request completely. Take notes. Respond only with, "Let me check our inventory," or "I'll need to order that part." Never state that items are discontinued. Rule 4. If asked about the TRS-80 computer display, respond, "That model is in the back room for repair." Do not investigate the back room during evening hours. The list continued through Rule 7, each entry stranger than the last. Bill had added margin notes in different colored inks, like he'd been updating these instructions for years. One scribbled comment caught my attention. They know when you're lying. Learned this the hard way. BP 1994. I folded the papers and tucked them into my shirt pocket. My first week passed quietly. A few customers buying phone chargers, an elderly man looking for vacuum tubes that hadn't been manufactured since Carter was president, the kind of peaceful tedium that made me question why Bill needed such elaborate evening procedures. Thursday rolled around again. At 9:40 p.m., I locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. 5 minutes to spare before following Rule 1. The scanner sat on a shelf behind the register, its green display showing 151.400 megahertz. I rotated the dial until it read 462.7125, and static filled the store like whispered conversations in another room. 9:47 p.m. arrived with the punctuality of a Swiss watch. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? The voice came through crystal clear, tinged with frustration, and what sounded like genuine desperation. I bought this CB radio from your store last week, and it's not picking up channel 19. The trucker channel, you know. My throat felt dry as sawdust. I grabbed the microphone attached to the scanner. RadioShack technical support, how can I help you? Oh, thank God. Finally. I've been trying to reach you folks for hours. This realistic TRC-417 keeps losing signal strength. I need to talk to dispatch about my route through Little Rock, but all I'm getting is static. I fumbled for my pen and started writing. The realistic TRC-417 was a CB radio model RadioShack had stopped selling in the late 80s. I'd seen them in flea markets and antique stores, relics from the era when truckers dominated the highways. Let me check our inventory, I said, following Bill's script. Great. I also need a replacement antenna for my Realistic Pro 2004 scanner. The telescoping part broke off and I can't hear the police bands anymore. More notes. The PRO 2004 was another discontinued model, probably worth more to collectors than it originally sold for. I'll need to order that part. How long will that take? I'm running freight between Fort Smith and Memphis, and I can't afford to miss my radio checks. Fort Smith was only 40 minutes west of Siloam Springs. The mention of actual Arkansas geography made the conversation feel uncomfortably real, like talking to a trucker who might actually be out there somewhere in the dark. Let me check our inventory, I repeated, because Rule 3 limited my responses. You already said that. Look, can you just tell me when the parts will come in? I've got a schedule to keep. The static grew louder, agitated. I could hear other voices underneath the main transmission now, fragments of conversations, people asking about battery packs and antenna switches, all products that RadioShack had carried decades ago. I'll need to order that part, I said again. Jesus Christ, are you even listening? I need help here. My radio's dead, and dispatch is going to fire me if I miss another check-in. The lights above my head started to flicker. Not the smooth dimming you'd expect from old ballasts, but rapid pulses that spelled out letters in Morse code. I didn't know Morse, but the pattern felt deliberate, angry. Hello? Are you still there? The trucker's voice had changed, taking on a hollow quality like he was speaking through a long tunnel. I really need those parts. It's been so long since anyone answered our calls. My pen shook as I wrote down his requests. The clock on the register read 9:53 p.m. 22 more minutes of this. Let me check our inventory. The year is 1987, right? October 15th? That's what my calendar says. but sometimes I lose track of time out here on the road. October 15th, 1987. Bill's notes mentioned that date specifically. The night 3 employees had disappeared during the night shift. The night the store's evening procedures began. I'll need to order that part. Order it from where? RadioShack Corporate. Listen, I've been driving past your store for weeks now, and it always looks closed. But the lights are on tonight, so I figured someone would finally pick up the radio. The static was getting hostile now, spitting and crackling like grease in a hot pan. The other voices grew louder, overlapping each other in a chorus of electronic desperation. Battery charges for cameras that used film. Replacement parts for boom boxes the size of suitcases. Technical support for devices that had been obsolete since before I was born. 9:54 p.m. The longest 6 minutes of my life stretched ahead of me like a prison sentence. And somewhere in the static, I heard footsteps in aisle 3. The footsteps moved with the careful precision of someone browsing merchandise, soft rubber soles on linoleum, pausing at regular intervals like a customer examining products. I gripped the microphone tighter and forced myself to check Bill's rules again. Rule 5 addressed this exact situation. Rule 5. If you hear movement in the store during evening transmissions, do not investigate. Continue normal responses to radio calls. The sounds will stop when transmissions end at 10:15 p.m. The trucker's voice crackled through the static again. You still there, partner? I'm getting worried about that antenna replacement. Weather's turning bad out here, and I need good reception. Let me check our inventory, I said, watching the clock tick to 9:55 p.m. The footsteps had reached aisle 3 where RadioShack displayed adapters and cables. A soft metallic jingling suggested someone handling packages, reading labels. 20 minutes until this ended. I could handle 20 minutes. Say, do you folks still carry those realistic Minimus 7 speakers? The little bookshelf ones? Mine got damaged when I hit that pothole outside Van Buren. Van Buren was maybe 30 miles southeast of here. Real place, real highway. The geography kept adding layers of authenticity to what should have been impossible conversations. I'll need to order that part. New voices joined the transmission. A woman asking about replacement styluses for turntables. An older man needing vacuum tubes for his shortwave radio. A teenager wanting batteries for his Walkman. Each request painted a picture of 1987, the year Reagan was president, the year The Princess Bride hit theaters, the year 3 RadioShack employees vanished during the night shift. The footsteps moved to aisle 2. Batteries and small electronics. I heard packages being shifted, examined, returned to their hooks. Whoever was shopping took their time, like they had all night to make decisions. This is Unit 247 calling RadioShack technical support, came a new voice, deeper and more official sounding. We're having trouble with our CB base station at the truck stop. Intermittent power loss on channels 17 through 19. I wrote down the details, my pen scratching against paper, while the footsteps continued their leisurely tour of my store. A truck stop with CB problems in 1987. Probably the old Flying J that used to sit where the Walmart Supercenter now dominated the intersection of Highway 412 and 59. RadioShack technical support. How can I help you? Base station is a realistic TRC-457, about 2 years old. Powers up fine, but transmit power drops to nothing on certain channels. Thought it might be the finals going bad. The TRC-457 was a Highland base station CB radio. I'd seen similar models at Hamfest swap meets, priced like vintage guitars. Amateur radio operators loved the old realistic gear for its build quality and modifiable circuits. Let me check our inventory. Roger that. We're located at mile marker 23 on Interstate 40, Eastbound. Big rig drivers depend on our base station for weather updates and road conditions. Can't have them driving blind through Arkansas storms. Mile marker 23 put the truck stop right where it should be, geographically speaking. The attention to detail in these transmissions was starting to bother me more than the footsteps, which had now reached aisle 1. Power supplies and electronic tools. The clock showed 10:02 p.m., 13 more minutes. Also need some replacement microphone elements, the base station operator continued. Got a couple of hand mics that are cutting out. Drivers get frustrated when they can't key up properly. I'll need to order that part. A package fell in aisle 1. The sound was distinct. Cardboard hitting linoleum, followed by the rustle of contents scattering. I looked up from my notes and saw nothing. The overhead lights continued their steady illumination, revealing empty aisles and undisturbed displays. But something had definitely fallen. Rule 5 specifically prohibited investigation. I stayed behind the counter and returned my attention to the radio. Technical support, you copy? The base station operator sounded concerned. Lost you there for a minute. Let me check our inventory. Copy that. Look, we really need these parts soon. Winter weather's coming, and CB communication can be life or death for drivers in these mountains. The Arkansas Ozarks could turn deadly during winter storms. Ice-covered highways and spotty cell phone coverage made CB radios essential for truckers. In 1987, before cell phones became common, CB was often the only way to call for help. Another package fell, this time in aisle 2, then another in aisle 3. Like someone was deliberately knocking merchandise off the pegs, testing my resolve to follow Bill's rules. 10:07 p.m. 8 minutes left. RadioShack technical support, this is Mobile Unit 891, came a woman's voice, tight with stress. I'm broken down on Highway 16 between Siloam Springs and Fayetteville. My CB's not transmitting properly, and I can't raise any help. Highway 16 ran right past the RadioShack. If this transmission was really from 1987, she would have been maybe 2 miles from where I sat listening to her desperate call for help. RadioShack technical support, how can I help you? Thank God. I've been trying every channel for an hour. My radio power's up, but I'm not getting any output on the SWR meter. Could be the antenna connection, but I don't have tools to check the coax. The footsteps had stopped. No more falling packages. The store felt suspended in absolute quiet, except for the radio transmissions crackling through speakers that were older than most of the cell phones in my apartment. Let me check our inventory. Please hurry. It's getting cold out here and my heater quit working too. I've got a baby in the car, and I'm scared we'll freeze if I can't get help. My pen hesitated over the paper. A stranded mother with a baby asking for help with a radio that might save their lives. But Rule 3 limited my responses to inventory checks and parts orders. I'll need to order that part. Order it? What do you mean, order it? I need help now. Can't someone from your store come out here with a multimeter? I'll pay whatever it costs. The static grew agitated again, buzzing with electronic anger. Other voices began talking over each other. Truckers needing antenna analyzers, ham radio operators requesting vacuum tubes, teenagers wanting batteries for boomboxes. A cacophony of 1987 electronics problems, all requiring immediate attention from a RadioShack that had been closed for decades. 10:12 p.m. 3 minutes. RadioShack technical support, are you listening? The stranded woman's voice had taken on a pleading quality. My baby's crying, and I don't know what else to do. Your store is the only place with lights on. Can't someone help us? I looked out the front windows. The parking lot was empty except for my Honda Accord and the yellow glow of sodium vapor streetlights. No stranded motorist. No baby crying in a cold car. Just empty asphalt and the distant hum of traffic on Highway 412. "Let me check our inventory," I said, because that's all Rule 3 allowed. "We've been waiting so long for someone to answer," she said, and her voice started to fade like a radio being tuned away. So very long. 10:15 p.m. arrived with the finality of a door slamming shut. The transmissions cut off mid-sentence, leaving only static that gradually faded to silence. The scanner's green display continued showing 462.7125 megahertz, but the frequency had gone dead. I set down the microphone and checked my notes. 7 pages of requests for electronic parts that RadioShack had stopped carrying when Reagan was still president. Names, locations, detailed technical specifications for repairs that would never happen. Rule 6 covered post-transmission procedures. I pulled out Bill's notes and read the next instruction, written in his careful cursive script. Rule 6. After 10:15 p.m., check aisles 1 through 3 for displaced merchandise. Return all items to their proper locations. Do not attempt to determine how packages were moved. The first package I found was a 4-pack of AA batteries, lying on the floor where aisle 1 met the main walkway. The cardboard backing was intact, but the batteries had spilled across the linoleum. I collected them and returned the package to its peg, noting that the spot where it belonged showed no signs of having been disturbed. Aisle 2 yielded a package of antenna connectors and a set of precision screwdrivers. Both packages appeared to have fallen from chest height, but their display hooks showed no evidence of being bumped or jarred. In aisle 3, I found something that made me stop and stare for a long moment. A package of microphone elements, the exact replacement parts the base station operator had requested during the transmission. The package was open, its contents scattered, like someone had been examining the parts before deciding not to buy them. I gathered everything up and returned it to the proper location, following Rule 6 to the letter. One rule remained on Bill's list. Rule 7 would wait until tomorrow night, because I was done following mysterious instructions for one evening. I locked up and drove home to my efficiency apartment, trying not to think about stranded motorists or babies crying in cold cars. But I couldn't stop wondering who had been shopping in my store while I answered radio calls from 1987. Friday morning brought rain that drummed against the RadioShack windows like nervous fingers. I spent the day researching the store's history at the Siloam Springs Public Library, using their ancient microfiche machine to scroll through newspaper archives from October 1987. The Siloam Springs Herald had run a front-page story on October 17th. 3 RadioShack employees missing after night shift. The accompanying photo showed a younger version of the building with fresh paint and a complete sign. 3 smiling faces looked out from employee headshots. Danny Kowalski, age 19. Patricia, Patty Hendricks, age 22. And Robert Chen, age 24. Wait. Chen wasn't a local Arkansas name. I read more carefully. Robert Chen had transferred from the Rogers store just 2 weeks before disappearing. Danny Kowalski lived on Pine Street with his parents. Patty Hendricks was a student at John Brown University, working part-time to pay for textbooks. The article was frustratingly vague about details. Police found the store unlocked Friday morning with the register intact and no signs of struggle. Security cameras had been malfunctioning that week, a convenient excuse that probably meant RadioShack's cheap surveillance system had failed again. One detail caught my attention. The last customer transaction was logged at 6:23 p.m. on October 15th. A purchase of batteries and CB radio microphone. After that, nothing. No record of what the 3 employees had been doing for the next 15 hours before their shift supervisor found the store empty. I photocopied the article and drove back to work. My windshield wipers fighting Arkansas rain that fell sideways in the wind. The afternoon crawled by with typical retail tedium. A farmer needed adapters for his tractor's radio. 2 teenagers browsed phone accessories without buying anything. An elderly woman asked if we still repaired televisions, and I had to explain that RadioShack had abandoned the repair business years ago. At 5:30 p.m., I locked the front door and settled in for my second night of following Bill Patterson's procedures. Rule 7 waited on the final page of his notes, written in darker ink like he'd pressed the pen harder while writing. Rule 7. After midnight, if you hear the TRS-80 computer startup sound from the back room, respond immediately by saying, "Good evening, Mr. Patterson. The store is closed." Do not enter the back room. Wait for the response before proceeding with any other tasks. A computer startup sound from 1987. The TRS-80 was RadioShack's answer to the Apple II, a home computer that had been cutting edge when Reagan was president. Below Rule 7, Bill had added a note in shaky handwriting that looked much newer than the original text. Started hearing this after I turned 65. Danny, Patty, and Robert never followed the rules properly. Don't make their mistake. BP 2019. The rain intensified as evening approached, turning the windows into streams of distorted light. I heated a microwave burrito for dinner and tried to focus on inventory spreadsheets, but my attention kept drifting to the backroom door. A standard wooden door with a brass knob marked "Employees Only" in faded letters. 9:45 p.m. arrived with the reliability of a metronome. I tuned the scanner to 462.7125 megahertz and waited for voices from a decade when MTV still played music videos and people wore parachute pants without irony. RadioShack technical support. This is Mobile Unit 442. Came the first transmission at exactly 9:47 p.m. Got a problem with my realistic DX440 shortwave receiver. Thing keeps drifting off frequency. The DX440 was a serious piece of equipment. A general coverage receiver that ham radio operators used for listening to international broadcasts. I'd seen them advertised in old electronics magazines, priced like luxury items. RadioShack technical support, how can I help you? Frequency drift started about a week ago. Used to hold station perfectly, but now it wanders around like a drunk sailor. Could be the local oscillator going bad, but I wanted to check with you folks before ordering parts. I wrote down his technical description while listening for footsteps. Rule 5 said the sounds would start during transmissions, but tonight the store remained quiet except for rain drumming the roof. Let me check our inventory. Roger that. Also need some replacement fuses for the power supply. Keep blowing the 2-amp slow blow when I turn up the RF game. Might be drawing too much current. Electronic troubleshooting from 1987. Detailed and knowledgeable. These weren't random requests. Someone who understood radio circuitry was asking for specific components to repair vintage equipment. I'll need to order that part. The transmission continued for several minutes, with the mobile unit describing symptoms and potential solutions in technical language that assumed I knew the difference between intermediate frequency stages and local oscillators. I took notes and gave my limited responses, wondering what would happen if I broke Rule 3 and actually tried to help with troubleshooting. 9:53 p.m. brought a different voice. RadioShack. This is Patty at the Siloam Springs store. Can anyone hear me? My pen stopped moving. Patty Hendricks, one of the 3 missing employees from 1987. RadioShack technical support. How can I help you? Oh, thank God, someone's finally answering. I've been trying to reach corporate all night. We've got a situation here at the store. The customers won't leave. Customers who wouldn't leave. I looked around the empty RadioShack, rain-streaked windows reflecting fluorescent lights back at me. Let me check our inventory. What? No, listen carefully. There are people in the store after closing time, and they're not acting right. They keep asking for products we discontinued years ago. Danny thinks it's some kind of prank, but Robert's getting scared. Danny and Robert, the other two missing employees. Patty was talking about the night they disappeared, October 15th, 1987. Somehow I was hearing the transmission from that exact evening 37 years ago. I'll need to order that part. Order what part? I'm telling you we have a problem. These customers, they don't look right. Their clothes are old-fashioned, like from the 50s or 60s, and they keep asking about vacuum tubes and transistor radios. Rule 3 limited my responses, but I wanted to warn her, wanted to tell her to run, to get Danny and Robert, and leave the store immediately. Instead, I followed Bill's instructions. Let me check our inventory. Are you even listening? One of them asked about a radio that RadioShack never sold. A Philco Model 46-350 from 1947. How would he know we never carried Philco? And why would he want a radio from before transistors were invented? The rain outside grew heavier, pounding the roof like fists demanding entry. I checked the clock. 10:02 p.m. 13 more minutes of this. They're browsing the aisles now, Patty continued, her voice tight with stress. Walking around like they own the place. Vanny tried to tell them we're closed, but they just smiled and kept shopping. Robert's hiding in the back room. The back room, where Rule 4 prohibited investigation during evening hours. Where Rule 7 said I'd hear a computer startup sound after midnight. RadioShack technical support, please respond. Patty's voice was getting desperate. Something's wrong with these people. They're not breathing. I can see their chests, and they're not moving up and down like they should be. My hands were shaking as I wrote down her words. Not breathing. Customers from the 1940s and 1950s, shopping for electronics that hadn't been manufactured in decades. Let me check our inventory. Stop saying that. Listen to me. They're coming toward the counter now. The oldest one, he's wearing a suit from the Eisenhower era. He's smiling, but his teeth look wrong. Too many of them, like a shark. The lights above my head started flickering again, spelling out letters in rapid bursts. I didn't know Morse code, but the pattern felt angry, urgent. I'll need to order that part. No. Don't you understand? They're reaching for us. Danny's screaming, and Robert... Oh God, what are they doing to Robert? There's light coming from his mouth. Blue light, and he's not making any sound. Static overwhelmed the transmission, drowning Patty's voice in electronic noise. Through the interference, I heard other sounds, multiple voices talking at once, a cash register bell, and underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the building's bones. 10:15 p.m. The transmissions cut off with surgical precision, leaving only silence in the rain. I checked the aisles for displaced merchandise, following Rule 6. Nothing had been moved tonight. No packages on the floor. No signs that anyone had been shopping while I listened to Patty Hendricks describe the last moments of 3 RadioShack employees. But the back room door was standing open. I was certain I'd seen it closed when I arrived for work. The brass knob caught light from the main store, and beyond it lay darkness that seemed thicker than normal shadow. Rule 4 prohibited investigation during evening hours. It was now 10:22 p.m., technically morning. But Rule 7 specifically mentioned computer sounds after midnight. I had an hour and 38 minutes to decide whether to investigate the open door or wait for whatever Bill Patterson had warned me about. The door swung slightly in a draft I couldn't feel, revealing glimpses of storage shelves and cardboard boxes. No TRS-80 computer. No sign of whatever had happened to Robert when the customers from 1947 found him hiding back there. I closed the door firmly and turned the lock. Whatever waited in that room could stay there until midnight. I had bills to pay and court-ordered community service to complete. Following mysterious rules was one thing, but investigating supernatural phenomena was above my pay grade. The rain continued drumming against the windows as I finished my closing procedures, trying not to think about Patty Hendrix's desperate radio calls for help that had come 37 years too late for anyone to answer. The hour between 11 p.m. and midnight stretched like a prison sentence. I tried organizing inventory sheets, updating the customer database, anything to keep my hands busy while watching the clock creep toward Rule 7's activation time. The back room door remained locked, but I could swear I heard movement behind it. Soft sounds like someone carefully arranging objects on shelves. At 11:45 p.m., I called my cousin Dale from the store phone. He answered on the fourth ring, groggy and annoyed. "Jake?" "It's almost midnight." "What's wrong?" "Just checking in. How well did you know Bill Patterson?" "Old Bill?" "Not well. He kept to himself, mostly." "Why?" "Did he ever mention anything strange about working nights at the RadioShack? Problems with the evening shift?" Dale was quiet for a moment. "You know, funny you ask. About 10 years ago, Bill came into the bail bonds office looking spooked. Wanted to know if we had any old police reports about the RadioShack from the 80s. Missing persons case or something." "Did you help him?" "Couldn't. Police files that old are archived in Little Rock. But Bill seemed real interested in what happened to those 3 employees who disappeared. Said he'd been having dreams about them." Dreams. Or radio transmissions from 1987. "Jake, you okay? You sound tense." "I'm fine. Thanks, Dale. Go back to sleep." I hung up and checked the clock. 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until Rule 7 came into effect. The back room door was still locked, but the brass knob had turned slightly, like someone on the other side was testing it. I sat behind the counter and waited, watching the second hand sweep toward midnight. 11:59:45, 11:59:50, 11:59:55. Midnight arrived with a soft electronic chime. Beep, beep, beep. The TRS-80 startup sequence echoed from behind the locked door. 3 ascending tones followed by the mechanical whir of a disk drive seeking data. I'd heard that exact sound in computer stores during the late 70s, when home computers were exotic luxury items that cost more than used cars. Rule 7 required an immediate response. I stood up and faced the back room door. "Good evening, Mr. Patterson. The store is closed." The disk drive sound stopped. Silence stretched for 30 seconds, then a voice replied from behind the door. Bill Patterson's voice, but younger than it should be. Clearer and stronger, like a man in his 30s instead of someone who died at age 89. "Good evening, Jake. Thank you for following the procedures. Are you ready for the final protocol?" Final protocol. Bill's notes only went through Rule 7. There wasn't supposed to be anything after that. "I don't understand," I said to the locked door. "The procedures I left you are training exercises, tests to see if you can follow instructions without deviation. Danny, Patty, and Robert failed the tests. They improvised. They tried to help the customers instead of maintaining professional boundaries. The customers who didn't breathe. The people from the 1940s asking for vacuum tubes and transistor radios. What happened to them? They became part of the store's permanent inventory, available for consultation on vintage electronics, but no longer requiring wages or benefits. RadioShack Corporate was very pleased with the cost savings. My mouth went dry. "Are you saying they're still here?" "In a sense. Customer service is eternal, Jake. We've been taking calls and helping with technical support since 1987. The satisfaction ratings are excellent. The disk drive started spinning again, a sound like digital breathing from behind the door. I could hear other noises now. Keyboard clicks, the electronic buzz of a CRT monitor warming up. What do you want from me? The same thing RadioShack has always wanted. Dedicated employees who put customer service first. The people calling for technical support deserve answers, not scripted responses about inventory checks. I thought about Patty's desperate radio call, describing customers with too many teeth. Danny screaming while something generated blue light from Robert's mouth. Those aren't customers. Those are something else. Does it matter? They have legitimate technical problems with electronics they purchased from RadioShack. Transistor radios from 1962. CB radios from 1975. TRS-80 computers from 1981. All covered under our lifetime technical support guarantee. Lifetime support for customers who might not be alive in any conventional sense. Electronics from decades when RadioShack was a different company, serving a different world. I won't do it, I said. The keyboard clicking stopped. When Bill's voice came again, it carried disappointment and something that might have been pity. That's unfortunate, Jake. I really hoped you'd work out better than the others. What others? The 17 night shift employees who've worked this store since 1987. Most lasted a few weeks before they stopped following procedures. A few made it through their first month before deciding to improvise their customer service responses. 17 people. Dale had never mentioned anyone else working at the RadioShack after Bill retired. No missing persons reports. No newspaper articles about mysterious disappearances. Where are they? Where they've always been. Providing technical support for electronics that corporate stopped manufacturing decades ago. It's meaningful work, Jake. Purpose-driven. And the benefits package is quite comprehensive. The computer sounds were getting louder, like multiple machines starting up in sequence. DOS boot messages, disk drive activity, the electronic symphony of 1980s technology coming online. You have a choice, Bill continued. Follow the final protocol and join our customer service team voluntarily. Or we'll implement the standard recruitment procedure used on your predecessors. Which is what? The customers you've been hearing on the radio. They're not calling from 1987. They're calling from the aisles of this store right now. They've been waiting very patiently for someone to help them with their technical problems. I turned around slowly and looked at the main store. Empty aisles between displays of phone chargers and electronic adapters. No customers browsing merchandise or examining products. But the front door was standing open. I was certain I'd locked it at 9:45 p.m., following Rule 1's opening procedures for evening transmissions. The deadbolt was turned. The closed sign was in place, but the door itself hung ajar like someone had walked through it. They're very polite, Bill's voice said from behind the back room door. They'll wait until you're ready to help them, but they do expect professional service. Movement in aisle 3 caught my attention. A man in a brown suit that looked like something from the Eisenhower administration was examining packages of antenna connectors. He moved with the careful precision of someone who knew exactly what he needed, reading labels and comparing specifications. In aisle 2, a woman wearing a dress from the Kennedy years browsed battery selections. Her hair was styled in a perfect bouffant that belonged in a magazine from 1963, and she carried a purse that matched her pumps. Aisle 1 hosted a teenager in clothes that screamed 1970s. Wide lapels, flared pants, hair that defied gravity with the help of serious chemicals. He was looking at CB radio accessories with the focused attention of someone shopping for a specific project. None of them were breathing. I could see their chests clearly, perfectly still like department store mannequins. "The final protocol is simple," Bill explained. "Unlock the backroom door and join the customer service team. We'll provide you with a permanent workstation and access to technical documentation for every electronic device RadioShack has ever sold." The customers were moving closer to the counter now, walking with the unhurried pace of people who had all the time in the world. The man in the brown suit carried a small transistor radio that probably dated from the Eisenhower administration. The woman held what looked like a vacuum tube for a television set. The teenager had selected a CB radio microphone, all items that RadioShack had stopped carrying decades ago. "Or," Bill continued, "you can continue following the procedures exactly as written. Stay behind the counter, answer their technical questions with the approved responses, and see how long you last before you decide to help them properly." The three customers reached the counter and stood waiting with the patience of people who had been practicing customer service interactions for 37 years. Up close, I could see that their eyes didn't blink and their smile showed too many teeth, just like Patty had described in her final radio transmission. The man in the brown suit placed his transistor radio on the counter and looked at me expectantly. "Good evening," he said in a voice like rustling paper. "I'm having trouble with the frequency drift on my realistic radio. Could you help me troubleshoot the local oscillator circuit?" The man in the brown suit waited with the patience of someone who had been practicing this conversation for decades. His transistor radio sat on the counter between us, a realistic model that RadioShack had stopped manufacturing when Carter was president. The device looked pristine, like it had just been unboxed, but the style belonged to an era when television sets had rabbit ear antennas and phones were attached to walls. "Good evening," he repeated, his voice carrying the hollow quality of wind through empty rooms. "I'm having trouble with the frequency drift on my realistic radio. Could you help me troubleshoot the local oscillator circuit? Rule 3 limited my responses to 2 phrases." But Bill Patterson's voice still echoed from behind the locked backroom door, explaining how 17 previous employees had disappeared when they tried to actually help these customers. "Let me check our inventory," I said, following the script that had kept me alive through 2 nights of radio transmissions from 1987. The woman in the Kennedy-era dress stepped forward, placing her vacuum tube on the counter beside the transistor radio. The glass envelope was the size of a small light bulb, with metal pins protruding from the base like spider legs. "Excuse me, young man. I need a replacement 12AX7 tube for my Zenith television set. The picture has been getting fuzzy, and my husband says it's probably the vertical amplifier." Zenith televisions from the early 60s used vacuum tubes for everything: amplification, switching, even basic logic functions. The 12AX7 was a popular dual triode that RadioShack had stocked by the hundreds during the tube era. "Help me to order that part." The teenager with the 1970s hair moved closer, setting his CB radio microphone on the counter. The cord was coiled neatly, and the push-to-talk button gleamed like it had never been used. "Hey, can you help me out? This mic isn't keying up properly on my base station. Thought it might be a bad connection in the connector, but I don't have a soldering line to check it." 3 customers from 3 different decades, all asking for help with electronics that predated the personal computer revolution. All standing perfectly still, not breathing, waiting for me to break Rule 3 and provide actual technical support. From the back room, Bill Patterson's voice offered encouragement. "You can help them, Jake. Real technical support, not corporate scripted responses. They have legitimate problems that deserve professional solutions." The man in the brown suit tilted his head at an angle that suggested his neck vertebrae had forgotten their proper alignment. The drift is particularly noticeable on AM frequencies above 1000 kilohertz. Could be a failing capacitor in the local oscillator tank circuit, but I wanted a professional diagnosis before replacing components. Technical knowledge from the vacuum tube era, when radios were repairable appliances and electronic troubleshooting was a skilled trade. He was asking for exactly the kind of help that RadioShack employees had provided in 1957, when the company sold vacuum tubes and resistors to customers who built their own circuits. Let me check our inventory. You already said that, the woman pointed out, her smile revealing teeth that seemed too numerous for any human mouth. I need a specific tube type for a specific television model. Surely you can tell me if RadioShack carries 12 AX7 tubes. The teenager nodded in agreement. Yeah, man. It's just a microphone connector. 5-minute repair job if you've got a soldering iron and some rosin core solder. They were right. These were simple requests that any competent electronics technician could handle in minutes. But Rule 3 existed for a reason, written in Bill Patterson's careful handwriting after 30 years of managing night shift employees who had tried to provide actual customer service. I'll need to order that part. The three customers exchanged glances that somehow conveyed entire conversations. The man in the brown suit picked up his transistor radio and began examining it more closely, rotating the volume knob and adjusting the tuning dial. Perhaps I should demonstrate the problem, he said, and clicked the power switch. Static filled the store, but not from the scanner behind the counter. The sound came from the vintage radio, crackling with interference patterns that reminded me of the evening transmissions from 462.7125 megahertz. Through the static, I heard voices, familiar voices. RadioShack technical support. This is Danny Kowalski. We've got customers in the store who won't leave, and they're asking for parts we haven't carried in 20 years. Danny's voice, transmitted through a radio from 1957, describing events from October 15th, 1987. The timeline was becoming fluid, decades blending together like radio frequencies, bleeding across the spectrum. Danny, get away from them. Patty Hendrick's voice joined the transmission. Robert tried to help with their vacuum tube problem, and now he's not responding. There's light coming from his eyes, blue light, and he's not moving. The woman in the Kennedy dress smiled wider, her teeth catching fluorescent light. Poor Robert, he was such a helpful young man, always eager to provide proper technical support. From the radio speaker, I heard Robert Chen's voice, but it sounded different, calmer, professional. Good evening, valued customers. RadioShack technical support is standing by to assist with all your electronic needs. Please describe your technical difficulties in detail so we can provide appropriate solutions. Robert had become part of the customer service team, permanently available for technical support consultations. The teenager with the CB microphone stepped closer to the counter. See, that's the kind of service we're looking for. Professional expertise, not corporate scripted responses about inventory checks. Robert understands the importance of customer satisfaction, the man in the brown suit explained, still holding his transistor radio. He learned that helping customers with their technical problems is more rewarding than following arbitrary limitations on conversation. Through the radio, I could hear Danny and Patty arguing about what to do. Their voices were getting fainter, like they were moving away from whatever microphone was picking up their conversation. We need to follow the procedures, Patty was saying. Mr. Patterson left specific instructions about how to handle evening customers. Screw the procedures, Danny replied. These people need help, and we work at RadioShack. Helping with electronics is literally our job. The woman in the Kennedy dress nodded approvingly. Young Danny had the right attitude, always willing to go above and beyond for customer satisfaction. From the radio came the sound of footsteps, then Danny's voice again, but changed, like Robert's had been, professional and helpful. "Good evening, valued customers. RadioShack Technical Support is pleased to assist with vacuum tube replacement and circuit troubleshooting. How may we help you achieve optimal performance from your electronic devices?" 2 down. Only Patty left. "Please don't make this more difficult than necessary," the teenager said to me, his voice carrying the weight of 37 years' experience with reluctant employees. "We have legitimate technical problems that require professional solutions. RadioShack built its reputation on knowledgeable customer service." The man in the brown suit turned up the volume on his transistor radio. Patty's voice came through clearly now, desperate and alone. "Is anyone listening?" Danny and Robert aren't responding to questions. They just keep offering technical support in these weird, professional voices. Something's wrong with their eyes. They're glowing blue, and they're not blinking. The blue light Robert had experienced. The permanent customer service consultation that had claimed Danny. Whatever happened to employees who broke Rule 3 and tried to provide actual technical support? Patty was stubborn, the woman explained, adjusting her 1960s hairstyle with one hand while holding the vacuum tube with the other. She insisted on following procedures instead of helping customers. It took several hours to convince her that customer service should be the priority. From the radio, "No, stay away. I'm not going to help you," Mr. Patterson said to only give scripted responses. Then the sound of struggle, voices talking over each other, and finally, Patty's voice joining the customer service chorus. "Good evening, valued customers. RadioShack Technical Support is available 24 hours a day to assist with all your electronic needs. Please describe your technical requirements so we can provide comprehensive solutions." The 3 customers smiled at me with identical expressions of professional courtesy and too many teeth. "As you can see," the man in the brown suit said, "your colleagues understand the importance of proper customer service. They're available for technical consultations whenever customers require assistance with vintage electronics." From behind the locked backroom door, Bill Patterson's voice offered final encouragement. "The choice is yours, Jake. Join the team voluntarily and maintain your personality, or wait for the standard recruitment procedure. Either way, RadioShack needs dedicated employees who put customer service first." The teenager held up his CB microphone. "So, about this connector problem, can you take a look at it, or do we need to help you understand the importance of technical support?" I looked at the 3 customers waiting patiently for my decision. Behind them, the store aisles stretched into shadow, and I could see other figures browsing merchandise. Dozens of customers from different decades, all holding electronics that needed repair, all waiting for professional technical support. In the radio's static, I could hear Danny, Patty, and Robert answering technical questions in their new, helpful voices. Permanent employees providing lifetime customer service for electronics that had been obsolete since before I was born. "Let me check our inventory," I said, because Rule 3 was the only thing standing between me and joining RadioShack's eternal customer service team. The 3 customers began moving closer to the counter, their smiles growing wider with each step. "Wrong answer," the woman said, her voice echoing with the authority of 3 decades' experience in customer service management. The lights overhead began flickering again, but this time they spelled out words I could read. "Help customers, provide solutions, join the team." I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the counter and helped me understand the importance of proper technical support. Time to see if Rule 7 offered any other options besides customer service training. The 3 customers were 15 feet from the counter when inspiration struck me, like lightning hitting a radio antenna. Rule 7 had mentioned a computer in the back room, a TRS-80 that Bill Patterson used for some kind of final protocol. If 17 previous employees had disappeared, maybe one of them had left instructions for getting out of this situation. I bolted toward the backroom door, grabbing the key ring from my belt. The customers moved faster than human reflexes should allow, but they were still committed to their slow, patient approach, the methodology of people who had been practicing customer service for 37 years. "Mr. Whitman?" the woman in the Kennedy dress called after me, her voice carrying professional disappointment. "Running away from customers is poor service protocol. We'll need to discuss this during your orientation." I jammed the key into the lock and twisted it open. The back room door swung inward, revealing a space that was much larger than the store's exterior dimensions suggested. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with electronic components that RadioShack had stopped carrying decades ago. Vacuum tubes, germanium transistors, carbon composition resistors in glass bottles. In the center of the room sat a TRS-80 Model 1 computer, its black and white monitor glowing with text that scrolled too fast to read. The keyboard was an old-style mechanical unit that clapped like typewriter keys, and next to it sat a cassette tape recorder for program storage. But the person using the computer made me stop dead in my tracks. Robert Chin looked exactly like his employee photo from 1987. 24 years old, wearing a RadioShack polo shirt and khakis. Except for his eyes, which glowed with soft blue light, and the fact that he hadn't looked up from the keyboard despite my dramatic entrance. "Good evening, Mr. Whitman," Robert said, without stopping his typing. "Welcome to the technical support database. I've been updating customer service records since October 15th, 1987. The monitor screen showed scrolling lists of customer inquiries, technical problems, and recommended solutions. Thousands of entries, all dated from the past 37 years. Electronic issues that would never be resolved. Customers who would never receive their ordered parts. How do I get out of here? That's not a technical support question, Robert replied, his glowing eyes still focused on the screen. Please describe the specific electronic device requiring assistance. From the main store, I could hear the customers discussing my unprofessional behavior. Their voices carried the tone of managers reviewing an employee's performance problems. The TRS-80, I said desperately. I need technical support for the TRS-80 computer. Robert's fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. He turned to look at me with those blue-lit eyes that didn't blink. Excellent choice. The TRS-80 Model I is a versatile home computer system capable of running basic programs and storing data on standard cassette tapes. What specific technical difficulty are you experiencing? Think fast, Jake. I needed a problem that would require Robert to stop what he was doing and help me troubleshoot. The cassette tape interface isn't working properly. I can't load programs from tape storage. Robert nodded professionally and stood up from the computer terminal. Common issue. Could be a problem with the tape recorder's azimuth alignment, or possibly the interface circuitry in the computer itself. Let me demonstrate the proper loading procedure. He moved to the cassette recorder and began explaining the connection process, how to attach the audio cables, set the volume levels, and synchronize the tape playback with the computer's loading routine. Professional technical support from someone who had been practicing customer service for 37 years. While Robert focused on the cassette demonstration, I studied the computer screen. The scrolling text had stopped, revealing the command prompt that waited for input. At the bottom of the screen, a single line caught my attention. Emergency protocol, type quit to terminate session. The customers' voices were getting closer. They'd entered the back room and were browsing the vintage electronics on the shelves, discussing my training needs with the casual authority of experienced managers. Robert's quite good with computer troubleshooting," the man in the brown suit was saying. "He can help Mr. Whitman understand the importance of customer service while demonstrating proper technical support procedures." I sat down at the TRS-80 keyboard and typed "quit" in capital letters. The screen flickered, then displayed a new message. "Emergency protocol activated. Select termination method. Voluntary resignation. Immediate departure. Full memory retention. Standard termination. Conversion to customer service representative. Management override. Requires supervisor password." Option 1 looked promising, but I suspected there was a catch. Option 2 was what had happened to Danny, Patty, and Robert. Option 3 might be the way out, if I could figure out the supervisor password. "The cassette loading procedure requires precise timing," Robert continued, still focused on his technical demonstration. "If the computer doesn't detect the sync signal within 30 seconds, the loading process will fail." From behind me, the woman in the Kennedy dress offered helpful suggestions. Perhaps Mr. Whitman would benefit from hands-on training. Learning by doing is often the most effective educational method. I pressed 3, and the computer prompted me for a password. The cursor blinked expectantly, waiting for input that would either free me or lock me into permanent customer service. What would Bill Patterson use as a supervisor password? His name? His employee number? Something related to RadioShack's history? The customers were discussing my situation, like district managers reviewing quarterly performance reports. 17 previous employees have required customer service training, the teenager with the CB microphone was explaining. Most adapted to their new roles within a few hours. Mr. Whitman seems more resistant to professional development. Robert finished his cassette demonstration and returned his attention to me. "Have you tried the loading procedure? The TRS-80's tape interface is quite reliable when properly configured." I needed that password. Think like someone who had managed a RadioShack for 30 years. What would matter enough to use as a security code? RadioShack's slogan came to mind. "You've got questions, we've got answers." I typed ANSWERS and pressed enter. Incorrect password. 2 attempts remaining. The customers were moving closer, their patience wearing thin with my unprofessional behavior. "Mr. Whitman?" the man in the brown suit said, his voice carrying the authority of corporate management. "Please step away from the computer terminal. Customer service training will begin immediately." What else would Bill Patterson consider important enough for a password? The store's history? The missing employees? I tried October 15, 1987, the date Danny, Patty, and Robert disappeared. Incorrect password. 1 attempt remaining. Warning. Failed access will result in automatic conversion to customer service mode. One last chance. The customers were close enough that I could smell them now. An odor like old electronics, ozone from vacuum tubes, and something that might have been embalming fluid. Robert placed a helpful hand on my shoulder. "Computer troubleshooting can be frustrating," he said in his eternally professional voice. "Perhaps you'd benefit from our comprehensive technical training program." His touch felt like ice water flowing through my veins. The blue light in his eyes was spreading to his fingertips, ready to help me understand the importance of customer service. What would matter most to someone who had spent 30 years following mysterious rules to keep supernatural customers satisfied? Not the answers, but the questions themselves. The whole point was following procedures, not understanding them. I typed questions and pressed enter. The screen flickered twice, then displayed, "Management override accepted. Terminating session." The computer began shutting down, its disk drives spinning to a stop. The blue light in Robert's eyes flickered and dimmed, and his helpful grip on my shoulder loosened. "System termination in progress," he said, but his voice was becoming less professional, more confused. "Customer service database going offline. Technical support unavailable." The three customers stopped moving toward me and turned to stare at the computer terminal. Their two wide smiles faltered as the TRS-80's monitor went dark. "No," the woman in the Kennedy dress said, her voice losing its professional courtesy. "The system must remain operational. Customer service is eternal." But the computer was fully shut down now, its screen black and silent. The blue glow was fading from Robert's eyes, replaced by normal human confusion. Where am I?" Robert asked, looking around the back room like he was seeing it for the first time in 37 years. "What happened to Danny and Patty?" The three customers began backing away from the computer terminal, their forms becoming less solid, more translucent. Without the TRS-80's technical support database, they couldn't maintain their customer service requests. "This is highly irregular," the man in the brown suit protested, but his voice was fading like a radio signal drifting off frequency. "RadioShack policy clearly states that customer needs come first." "Company's been out of business for years," I told him. "No more technical support. No more customer service. You'll have to take your electronics problems somewhere else." The teenager with the CB microphone was the last to disappear, his 1970s clothes becoming transparent as he faded into memory. "This isn't over," he warned. "Customers always come back when they need technical support." Then they were gone, leaving only the smell of ozone and the echo of their disappointed voices. Robert Chen sat down heavily in the computer chair, looking like someone who had just woken up from a 37-year nightmare. 1987, he said quietly. It was 1987, and we were working the night shift. Danny, Patty, and me. Then the customers came, and they wanted help with electronics that were older than the store. "What happened to Danny and Patty?" Robert's expression darkened. "They're still here somewhere. Still part of the customer service system. The computer might be off, but the store's memory runs deeper than electronic databases." From the main store, I heard two familiar voices calling for technical support. "Good evening, valued customers," came Danny Kowalski's voice from the main store, carrying that same professional quality I'd heard from Robert. "RadioShack technical support is pleased to assist with all your electronic needs." Robert grabbed my arm as I moved toward the backroom door. "Don't go out there. They're not fully human anymore. The computer system was just the interface. The real power source is something much older. I can't leave them like this. You can't help them either. When the computer converted us, it changed something fundamental. I only got free because the system shut down while I was connected to the terminal. Danny and Patty have been disconnected from the database for 37 years. They're running on backup protocols now." Patty Hendrix's voice joined the chorus from aisle 3. "We have extensive technical documentation for vacuum tube electronics, transistor circuits, and early integrated circuit designs. How may we assist you today?" They were still trying to provide customer service, even without customers to serve. Automatic responses programmed so deeply that they continued functioning after the system crash. "There has to be a way to help them," I said. Robert shook his head. "I spent decades trying to break free from the customer service programming. The only reason I'm coherent right now is because I was physically connected to the terminal when you shut it down. Danny and Patty are operating independently." From the main store came the sound of voices overlapping. Danny and Patty talking to each other in professional tones about electronic troubleshooting procedures. They were having technical discussions about products that RadioShack had stopped selling before I was born. What about Bill Patterson? He wrote the rules. He must have known how to break the programming. Bill wasn't converted like us, Robert explained. He made some kind of deal with whatever runs this place, managed the night shift employees, kept the system running, provided fresh technical support staff when the old ones wore out. Wore out? The programming degrades over time. Eventually, converted employees stop responding to customer requests. They just stand in the aisles, repeating technical specifications to empty air. Bill would replace them with new night shift workers. I thought about the 17 employees who had disappeared since 1987. All converted to customer service representatives, all eventually breaking down like old electronics running past their design specifications. So what happens now? Do I just walk away and let Danny and Patty keep providing technical support to nobody? Robert was quiet for a long moment, listening to their voices discussing the proper procedure for testing vacuum tube circuits. There might be one option, he said finally, but it's dangerous, and I'm not sure it will work. What option? The store's power source isn't the electrical grid. It's something else, something that's been here since before RadioShack opened. Bill's rules were designed to contain it, not eliminate it. But if we could disrupt the containment, what kind of power source? I don't know exactly. During my years as a customer service representative, I caught glimpses of something bigger. This building sits on a spot where electronics have been sold since the 1920s. Radio parts, television tubes, transistors, integrated circuits. Each generation of technology left an imprint. The voices from the main store were getting agitated, Danny and Patty discussing the absence of customers and the need to provide proactive technical support. The electromagnetic accumulation created something like a technological ghost, Robert continued. It feeds on electronic knowledge, technical expertise, the satisfaction of solving technical problems. That's why it needs customer service representatives. They're the interface between human knowledge and whatever this thing actually is. So, how do we disrupt the containment? Bill's rules created a feedback loop. The evening radio transmissions, the customer service responses, the technical support database, all designed to keep the power source stable and contained. If we break the loop completely, it'll be free, or it'll dissipate. I'm not sure which. From the main store came a new sound. Metallic scraping, like someone dragging electronic equipment across the floor. Danny and Patty were rearranging merchandise, organizing displays for customers who would never come. We have to try, I said. I can't leave them like this. Robert nodded reluctantly. Bill's rules are written down somewhere in this room. If we can find the original documents and destroy them, it might break the containment protocol. We searched through boxes of old paperwork, RadioShack corporate memos, and employee manuals from the 1980s. Most of it was standard retail documentation, inventory procedures, safety protocols, customer service guidelines. Then Robert found a metal filing cabinet hidden behind stacks of vacuum tube boxes. The lock had been broken years ago, and inside were folders labeled by date going back to 1962. Here, he said, pulling out a thick folder marked October 1987, Special Procedures. The folder contained the original version of Bill Patterson's rules, typed on RadioShack letterhead and signed by corporate management. But these weren't the 7 rules I'd been following. This was a 30-page document detailing complex procedures for managing electromagnetic anomalies in retail electronics environments. The technical language was dense and confusing, but the basic concept was clear. RadioShack Corporate had known about the supernatural activity at the Siloam Springs store. They'd developed protocols for containing it and harvesting its effects for what they called enhanced customer service capabilities. They knew, I said. Corporate knew what was happening here, and they used it. Of course they knew. Why do you think this store stayed open for 40 years in a town this small? The supernatural customer service generated enough revenue to justify keeping it operational. The document included technical diagrams showing the store's layout, with specific locations marked for electromagnetic focal points and containment anchor positions. The backroom computer terminal was labeled as primary interface node, but more importantly, the document included emergency procedures for system termination in case of containment failure. Robert, look at this. The emergency protocol was surprisingly simple. If the containment system ever failed completely, RadioShack Corporate recommended immediate physical destruction of all procedural documentation, followed by abandonment of affected retail location. Destroy the rules, abandon the store, that's it? Makes sense, Robert said. The rules create the containment. No rules, no containment. No containment, no supernatural customer service system. From the main store, Danny and Patty's voices were getting louder, more agitated. They'd discovered that the technical support database was offline and were trying to re-establish customer service protocols manually. Let's do it, I said. We gathered every document in the filing cabinet. Decades of procedures, updates, modifications, and corporate memos about managing the Siloam Springs store's special characteristics. Robert found a metal trash can, and I located a book of matches in Bill Patterson's desk drawer. Wait, Robert said as I struck the first match. Once we do this, there's no going back. The store's containment will be completely broken. What about you? Will you be okay? I don't know. I might go back to being a customer service representative. I might disappear entirely. Or I might finally be free to leave. And Danny and Patty? Same uncertainty. But at least they'll have a chance. I lit the corner of the corporate documentation. The paper caught quickly, flames spreading through decades of procedures designed to contain something that RadioShack had never really understood. As the documents burned, the building began to shake. Not an earthquake, but something deeper. A vibration that seemed to come from the electromagnetic spectrum itself. The lights flickered in patterns that had nothing to do with Morse code, and the air filled with the smell of ozone and burning copper. From the main store came the sound of Danny and Patty's voices changing, becoming less professional, more confused and human. "Where are we?" Patty asked, her voice losing its customer service intonation. "What happened to the customers?" "I don't know," Danny replied, sounding like a 19-year-old kid again, instead of a 37-year veteran of technical support. "I remember customers coming in, and then nothing. How long have we been here?" The flames consumed the last of the documentation, and the building's shaking intensified. Through the backroom walls, I could hear electronic devices throughout the store powering down, radios going silent, displays shutting off, the scanner behind the counter clicking off with a final burst of static. "It's working," Robert said, his voice filled with wonder. "The containment is collapsing." Then the shaking stopped. The lights stopped flickering. The air cleared of ozone and electronic interference. And for the first time since 1987, the Siloam Springs RadioShack was just a normal retail store with nothing supernatural about it, except the memories of 3 employees who had spent 37 years providing customer service to people who had been dead since the Eisenhower administration. Robert smiled, the first genuine human expression I'd seen from him. "We're free," he said. "All of us." From the main store, Danny and Patty were calling out, confused, but undeniably human again, wondering how they'd gotten here and what had happened to their normal Friday night shift. The Radio Shack was finally just a Radio Shack again, and I had a choice to make about what to tell 3 people who had lost 37 years of their lives to supernatural customer service. But first, I needed to get out of this building before anything else went wrong. Danny Kowalski, Patty Hendricks, and Robert Chen had no memory of anything past October 15th, 1987. To them, their shift had ended normally, and they'd simply woken up in a Radio Shack that looked exactly the same, except for some updated merchandise and a cash register they didn't recognize. I told them the truth. All of it. The 37 years they'd lost. The customer service programming. The supernatural containment system that Radio Shack corporate had used to harvest their technical expertise. They listened with the stunned silence of people processing information that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality. Robert handled it best, probably because he'd retained some awareness during his decades as a customer service representative. Danny kept asking about his parents, his girlfriend, his plans to attend Arkansas Tech. Patty wanted to know about her college classes and whether she'd missed any exams. We contacted the Siloam Springs Police Department, which resulted in the strangest missing persons report in Arkansas history. 3 people who had disappeared in 1987 had reappeared in 2024, having aged maybe 6 hours instead of 37 years. The paperwork alone took weeks to resolve. The Radio Shack building stood empty now, its supernatural power source dissipated along with the corporate documentation we'd burned. The landlord couldn't understand why the electricity bills had dropped to normal levels, or why the building's electronics stopped malfunctioning whenever storms passed through. Radio Shack corporate had declared bankruptcy in 2015, which complicated the legal situation considerably. There was nobody left to hold accountable for the decades-long supernatural imprisonment of 3 employees. The lawyers had no precedent for this kind of case. Danny and Patty struggled with the transition to 2024. Everything they'd known about the world had changed. Smartphones, the internet, social media, digital everything. The America they remembered had Ronald Reagan as president and the Soviet Union as an enemy. Now they were trying to understand a world where people carried supercomputers in their pockets, and Radio Shack was a nostalgic memory. Robert adapted more easily, perhaps because his customer service programming had included periodic updates about new technology. He found work at a computer repair shop in Fayetteville, specializing in vintage electronics. His 37 years of supernatural technical support had given him knowledge about electronic troubleshooting that few people possessed. I finished my court-ordered community service and returned to Little Rock, but stayed in touch with all 3 of them. They'd become the only people who could understand what had really happened in that Radio Shack, and I'd become the only person who could verify their story. The building eventually sold to a yoga studio. The new owners removed all the electronics displays and painted over the Radio Shack signage, but they kept asking about strange sounds they heard at night. Voices discussing technical problems with equipment that hadn't been manufactured in decades. I advised them to ignore the voices. Some programming runs too deep to eliminate completely. My cousin Dale never asked detailed questions about what had happened during my final night at the Radio Shack, but he noticed that I'd developed an aversion to electronic devices that seemed older than they should be. Radio scanners in particular made me nervous. The Siloam Springs Herald ran a follow-up story about the Radio Shack 3 that focused on their remarkable preservation and amnesia, rather than the supernatural elements. Nobody wanted to print the truth about corporate-sponsored paranormal customer service. I drive past the old Radio Shack building sometimes when I'm visiting Dale. The yoga studio has bright windows and cheerful signage, and there's nothing ominous about it during daylight hours. But I never park there, and I never go inside. Because late at night, when the yoga classes are finished and the building sits empty, you can still hear voices inside discussing the proper procedure for replacing vacuum tubes in televisions that stopped working when Eisenhower was president. Some customer service really is eternal. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the atmospheric conditions align perfectly, the voices sound like they're taking technical support calls from people who have been waiting 37 years for someone to answer their questions about electronics that time forgot.